Okay, this is video 802, and this is over section 8.2 in your Miller and Levine textbook, and we're going to be looking at photosynthesis. Here are the objectives for this section. We're going to look at the characteristics of life. In particular, we're going to, characteristics of light. In particular, we're going to look at wavelength. We're going to look at the absorption qualities of the major photosynthetic pigments. We need to look at the structure of chloroplasts, the role of hydrogen, and we're going to look at what happens in the light-dependent and light-independent reactions, and we need to know where they occur in the chloroplast. Now, at any time, you should probably stop the video so you can go ahead and answer the questions that go along with this. Okay, so how would you design a system to capture the energy of sunlight and convert it into a useful form? Well, plants have already done this, and maybe we can learn a trick or two from them. So if you remember what goes into photosynthesis, we had carbon dioxide is needed, and then water is needed. And there was one other thing that was needed in order for photosynthesis to happen. Do you remember what that was? That's right, it's light. Well, how does this light get into photosynthesis? Well, we have little molecules that are called pigments, and these absorb the light, and they help with the process of photosynthesis. So in the plants, they gather it with molecules called pigments, as I said, and the main pigment is chlorophyll. So what color do you think chlorophyll is? That's right, chlorophyll is green, and actually the prefix chloro means green, and phyll, P-H-Y-L, means leaf. So we have the chlorophyll pigments that are green, and we also have red and orange pigments. Now, can you tell me why chlorophyll looks green? Okay, so if you remember, the reason why colors look the way they look is because, so if we're looking at something that's green, that means that all the colors other than green are being absorbed, and the color green is the color that's being reflected, and we see the color that is being reflected. So let's look at the graph that I put on your notes. All right, so take a look at the graph, and if you look on the y-axis, that's where it tells you the percent absorption, and on the x-axis it tells you what color of light is being absorbed. So wherever it is high, that's the color that's being absorbed. Wherever it's low, that's the color that's being reflected. So we have two types of chlorophyll. You have chlorophyll A and B, and they usually are working in tandem together. And so if you look at A and B, they kind of cover everything from the 400 wavelength to the 500 wavelength, and that kind of covers your blue, your indigo, and your violet. Okay, do you see that? Then if you look at the carotenoids, that's the gold line, it covers about the same area. Okay, now the difference you see, nothing absorbs the green area, a little bit, tiny bit at the yellow area, I'm going to the right, and then on the orange and red spectrum, that's where your chlorophyll absorbs again, but the carotenoids do not. So if chlorophyll A and B were not present, what color do you think the leaves would be? That's right, the leaves would be in the yellow, orange, red range. Now if you think about it, in the winter, or when the weather starts getting cold, what happens when the temperatures drop is that chlorophyll starts degrading and the molecules start breaking down. And so since chlorophyll is green, the green is no longer there. And what's left is going to be the carotenoids, so that would be why your leaves have the red and the orange pigments. You might want to stop here so you can go ahead and answer those questions in your notes about the light absorption. All right. In the plant, the main place that photosynthesis occurs is in the leaves. Now if you look at a leaf, so if I draw you a leaf right here, okay, this is my leaf, okay, and you know it's got the little veins here. Got that center vein, and you have the little veins. Well, these veins are called the xylem and the phloem. And what do veins do? Think about it in your body. What do your veins do? That's right. They carry your blood. But in your blood is also oxygen, minerals, and other nutrients. So the same thing happens with the veins that are in a leaf. Okay? And let me erase this. So in the xylem, that's where the water is transported. And then in the phloem, that's where the nutrients are transported. Okay? So xylem is the water, phloem would be where the nutrients are. Now these veins start at like the root, and they go up through the stem, out the branches, and to the leaves. And so now we're looking at a leaf if you were to cut it in cross section. Now there's a couple of things I want to point out in the leaf. Right here where it says stoma, that is that hole that's right there. A stoma is a hole, okay? There's also a stoma over here also. But what's important about the stoma, this is where the oxygen comes out, for O2, and it's also where your CO2 goes in. Okay? And then around the stoma are these cells that are called guard cells, and these guard cells control the opening of the stoma. So when the plant is really dry, the guard cells kind of close up, and when there's a lot of water, the guard cells open up. Now I want you to look at this. See all those little green dots that are on here? What are those green dots? Is it chlorophyll or is it chloroplasts? Okay, they're chloroplasts. And each one of those little chloroplasts, they can do photosynthesis. So since the leaves are so full of chloroplasts, that is why most photosynthesis takes place in the leaves. So here's a chloroplast. You might want to stop the video so you could go ahead and label it. There's a couple extra things I want to point out. So you have your outer membrane and you have your inner membrane, and between the membranes you have what's called the intermembranous space, and this is the area between the membranes. Okay. You also have these connections that are between the thylakoids. Okay, so you have a thylakoid. A thylakoid is just one of those little discs. Okay, that would be a thylakoid. The whole stack of them, the whole stack, is called a granum. And these little connections that connect each of the granum are called lamella. L-A-M-E-L-L-A. Lamella. All right? And then the stroma, not to be confused with stoma. The stroma is the space in between all those grana. Okay? Now if you have more than one granum, plural is grana. Okay? And then this lumen here, this is inside the thylakoid. Thylakoid. Okay? Now, once those pigments in the chloroplast, the chlorophyll, absorb that light or absorb that energy, these electrons, which are where the energy is in the high energy electrons, they're needed in photosynthesis in order for photosynthesis to happen. So we have what are called electron carrier molecules. And an electron carrier is a compound, and it can accept a high pair of high energy electrons and transfer them with the energy to another molecule. So an electron carrier is a compound that can transfer electrons to another molecule. The electron carrier that we use in photosynthesis, or that is used, is called NADP+. NADP+, and this is the scientific name for it, this nicotiniamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. No, you do not have to know the scientific name. You do need to know the NADP+. Well, what NADP+ does is it can carry a hydrogen. Okay, how many protons does a hydrogen have? That's right. Oops. That's right. It has one proton, and then it has one electron. And the charge on an electron is a minus. Charge on a proton is positive. Well, when a hydrogen loses an electron, it becomes a hydrogen ion. Another name for that is a proton. So sometimes we say protons, or we might say hydrogen ions, but they both mean the same thing. Proton, H+, and then hydrogen ion. I'm sorry, I'm not writing too well with this. Okay? Now this NADP+ that we talked about is that electron carrier that's in photosynthesis. And what it does is it can carry 2 electrons, and it can carry a hydrogen ion. So if it's able to do that, so we've got 2 pluses up here, right? NADP+ and the hydrogen plus, and then 2 negatives, or the 2 electrons, and that kind of balances that out. And what it becomes is called NADPH. So you have NADP+, okay, and it can carry 2 electrons and a hydrogen ion. So you could think of the high energy electrons being similar to a hot potato. And if you wanted to move the potato, you couldn't just pick it up with your hands because it's too hot. You have to move it with an oven mitt. So the same thing with these electrons, these high energy electrons. They've got so much energy that they just can't be picked up and moved. They have to be taken with a special molecule, which is our NADP+, or our electron carrier. So this NADP+, look what I highlighted in yellow. You add a hydrogen to it, and you add 2 electrons to it, and it becomes NADPH. Now this NADPH is what's going to be used to run chemical reactions that happen elsewhere. So do you remember what the reactants and products of photosynthesis are? Okay, well, we got carbon dioxide and water. This will be our reactants. And then sugars and oxygen will be our products. All right. Now I want you to stop the video here and go ahead and label your chloroplast. Now we labeled it before as far as what the parts were. Now I want you to look at this and see what happens where. So your light reactions happen where? That's right. This is the thylakoid. Okay. So light reactions happen on the thylakoid membrane. Now this Calvin cycle, another name for the Calvin cycle is called the light independent reactions. Now these are not in the thylakoid, are they? They're not in the granum. Where's this? That's right. This area, since it's not the thylakoid, is going to be called the stroma. So the light independent happen in the stroma, and the light dependent, or the light reactions, another name for that is light dependent, happen in the thylakoid. So if you remember, if you look back at our little picture here, water comes in the light reactions, and what comes out? That's right, oxygen. Oops. There. So water goes in, goes in the light dependent, and what comes out? Oxygen. So that leaves our carbon dioxide going in the light independent, and our glucose coming out of the light independent. Let's check our picture. Right, there's the glucose coming out, and then there's our carbon dioxide that goes in. Now that NADP+ is made in the light reactions, isn't it? I'm sorry, NADPH is made in the light reactions, and it's going to get sent over to the Calvin cycle, used there. Those hydrogens and electrons are dropped off, and then they come back over here. So the first photosynthesis involves two sets of reactions. You have the light dependent and the light independent. And they require direct involvement of light and light absorbing pigments. And where did you say that they occurred? That's right, in the thylakoid. Okay. Now, the light dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid. What actually happens is that light hits your pigments, which are located here at photosystem 2. Photosystem 2 happens before photosystem 1. So those electrons are taken here. They are energized. Okay? And you have hydrogens that are floating around here in the stroma. And they are diffusing across this membrane. Okay? So if you notice, there's a lot of hydrogen ions in here. So now we're going against the concentration gradient. So that requires energy, doesn't it? Well, when those electrons are moved from photosystem 2, they go to what is called the electron transport chain. And when that happens, that water molecule that's there gets split. In other words, the hydrogens come off, because you have H2O, right? The hydrogens come off, and that oxygen is actually released into the atmosphere. So that's the oxygen that we breathe. So as these hydrogens are building up inside this thylakoid space, we have what's called what? That's right, a concentration gradient. Now these electrons are moving along the electron carrier chain, and they eventually get to photosystem 2. Photosystem 2 has pigments also. And when light hits that, it energizes those tired electrons and moves them on out. Okay? So that energy from those electrons, when the hydrogens come back through and they leave the thylakoid space and go into the stroma, this happens due to an enzyme called ATP synthase. This process is called chemiosmosis. Okay. So that's osmosis of chemicals, right? So it's osmosis of the hydrogen, and it's going, this time it's going with the concentration gradient. And as it goes through, the phosphate is added back to the ADP. So that's called phosphorylation. Now this ATP that's made and this NADPH that's made are going to go over and be used in the light independent reactions. So water is required. That's your electrons and that's your hydrogen ions. Okay. Your oxygen is released. We said that. Here's the oxygen down here. It gets released. Okay. And then ATP and NADPH are going to be sent to the light independent reactions. So in the light independent, light's not required, but it can happen, it can work during the day or at night, but it usually happens while the light dependent reactions are happening, because those NADPHs and the ATPs are getting sent over. Okay? So in the light independent reactions, what gets produced is carbon dioxide. Here it is here. ATP and the NADPH go in, right? Because those came from the light dependent reactions. And then sugar gets produced. And those ADP and NADP pluses are recycled back over to the light dependent reactions. And where does this occur? That's right, in the stroma. So you need to go ahead and make your little table, and you can, I would make a table to show what happens in the light dependent and the light independent. Make sure you know what goes in them and what comes out, and you should be fine. Here's a couple of review questions. Plants use the sugars produced in photosynthesis to make what? That's right, starches. The raw materials required for plants to carry out photosynthesis. So what's needed for photosynthesis to happen? Carbon dioxide and water, and remember it has to be in the presence of light. What's the main pigment? That's right, chlorophyll. The colors of light that are absorbed by chlorophyll are which ones? That's right. Blue, violet, and red. Good job. We will discard that. I need to stop this. I'm looking for my little oh goodness.